Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, today we are unpacking a really fascinating central mystery that sits right at the heart of our tech-driven world. We interact with computers every single day, right? But there's this lingering philosophical debate about the field that actually created them. Is computer science truly a science, or is it just a highly advanced form of toolmaking and engineering? Well, we're going to unpack exactly how this young discipline fits into the grand tradition of human knowledge.
The legendary computing pioneer Edsger Dijkstra perfectly captured a common misconception here. He said that to call the field computer science is like calling surgery knife science. It's a great quote, isn't it? It's this witty reminder that we constantly make the everyday assumption that the field is merely about the physical computer, the hardware, the silicon chips, the screens. But Dijkstra is playfully pointing out that the computer is literally just the instrument. Just like surgery is about human anatomy and healing, computing is about something much, much deeper than just the machine itself.
Okay, let's dive into this. If the physical machine is basically just the scalpel, what is the actual body of knowledge being studied here? What makes this discipline a legitimate science, on par with physics or chemistry? Let's trace the true scientific foundations of the field, starting with how we classify human knowledge in the first place. To understand where computer science fits, we first need to look at the classical sciences. Think of this hierarchy kind of like looking through a microscope. At the very center, right at the highest magnification, you've got logic and mathematics. They deal with pure abstract truths. Then, as you zoom out, you get the natural sciences, like physics and biology, which rely heavily on that math. Zoom out even further, and you find the social sciences, and eventually the humanities and culture. Logic and math act as the hidden foundation for everything else. Physics uses math as a tool without questioning its internal structure, chemistry relies on physics, and so on. But computer science? It's entirely unique. It actually bridges these concentric circles in ways that completely challenge our old definitions. The reason this field is so tough to pin down actually goes all the way back to ancient Greece. Let's contrast Aristotle's classical definitions to see exactly why. Historically, science studied unchangeable objects, think planetary orbits or basic chemical elements, and they were driven by an inside principle of motion. Technology, on the other hand, dealt with changeable objects built by humans with an outside principle of motion. For centuries, this sharp binary distinction worked perfectly. But computer science completely breaks these old rules. It doesn't fit neatly into traditional scientific boxes because it studies something that is constantly changing. And here is the major pivot. Unlike classical physics, which studies universal laws that literally never change, computer science studies a dynamic, ever-developing artifact, the computer. A computer from the 1940s is entirely different from the smartphone in your pocket today. But more importantly, the true subject of inquiry isn't matter or energy, it's information. Think about it this way. Just as the Industrial Revolution was fundamentally about the mastery and use of physical energy, the modern computer revolution is entirely about the mastery, transformation, and utilization of information. So that brings us to the formal definition. The discipline of computing is the systematic study of algorithmic processes that describe and transform information. It encompasses their theory, analysis, design, efficiency, implementation, and application. This is exactly why understanding this field matters so much to our daily digital lives. Every single time you run a complex search query or train an AI model, you are relying on rigorous scientific principles that dictate how information can be optimally structured, processed, and transformed from one state to another. And because information literally touches everything, the field has exploded into an incredibly diverse ecosystem. We're talking discrete structures, algorithms, artificial intelligence, human-computer interaction, software engineering, architecture, operating systems. The list goes on. It's massive. It brilliantly demonstrates the sheer breadth of this young science. It encompasses abstract mathematical thinking, hard engineering, and even psychology when you're dealing with how humans interact with these systems. But with all this vast diversity, how do we actually know they're doing science? Well, because they rely on the exact same rigorous empirical methods as a biologist or a chemist. They follow the hypothetico-deductive loop. First, they pose a question based on existing knowledge. Second, they formulate a hypothesis. Third, they deduce consequences and make predictions. And fourth, they test it. If an algorithm is supposed to sort data in a certain amount of time, you predict its performance mathematically, and then you test it empirically. Science is in a constant state of change and self-correction, and computer science is absolutely no different. Now, across all these different areas, there is one vital, unifying technique that connects the theoretical, experimental, and simulation branches of the field. That technique is modeling. Modeling is simply the process of simplifying a really complex phenomenon into a symbolic language so we can actually predict its observable consequences. You can't study the entire messy reality all at once, right? So you abstract it. You figure out what features are relevant, what to ignore, and you build a testable representation. Now, what's really interesting is how that abstraction process works in practice. You start out with the real world as it is, the raw phenomena. You convert that messy reality into a simplified model. And then, crucially, you move to comparison. You ask, does it actually work? You test the model against reality. Does the compiler theory create a working program? Does the artificial neural network recognize the right patterns? If there's a discrepancy, you loop right back, tweak the model, and try again. It's a continuous, rigorous loop of scientific validation. To execute these models, the discipline relies on three main methodological pillars. First up, Pillar 1, theoretical computer science. This theoretical pillar sticks closely to those traditions of logic and mathematics we saw at the center of the classical sciences microscope earlier. It's all about building theories using really powerful mathematical tools. We're talking iteration, recursion, which is basically self-definition, and induction. Theoreticians use these methodologies to test the absolute limits of computation. For example, they try to prove whether certain computations can even be done within a given amount of time or memory. You might have heard of the famous P equals NP question. This is pure theoretical science. They aren't building physical machines here. They are mapping the fundamental mathematical boundaries of what is possible to compute in our universe. But hey, theory can really only take us so far, right? That brings us to Pillar 2, experimental computer science. Here, we shift gears from pure math to actually observing and testing real-world information processes. To truly understand how complex software or massive networks behave, computer scientists have to observe phenomena, formulate explanations, and test them rigorously against reality. And in this experimental realm, there is a strict standard of uncertainty. To paraphrase Dijkstra once again, an experiment can only show the presence of bugs or flaws in a theory, not their absence. This highlights a really crucial scientific truth. Scientists have to always be ready to toss out a theory if contradicting evidence shows up. Repeatability is the absolute baseline for trust. If a researcher claims an algorithm works under certain conditions, other scientists must be able to independently repeat the experiment and get the exact same results. And what's wild is that experimental computer science often drives totally new discoveries where theory actually falls short. A brilliant example of this is artificial neural networks. Years ago, these were largely discarded on theoretical grounds. The math suggested they just wouldn't be efficient enough. But researchers pushed forward experimentally anyway, and the observed reality completely outperformed the theoretical expectations. Experiment drove the discovery. Now, researchers are having to hustle to develop better theories just to explain why the neural networks we use today are actually working so incredibly well. Let's move on and see how this all builds to our climax. Pillar 3, computer simulation. In recent years, computation has gotten so incredibly powerful that it's birthed an entirely new paradigm called computational science. For example, take these variants of an astrophysical n-body cold-dark matter model. They show us how simulation literally makes the impossible possible. Computer science allows us to simulate and map the evolution of the universe itself. Obviously, we could never put a galaxy into a physical lab to test how it forms, but by using highly complex algorithms and supercomputers, we can investigate regimes and physical phenomena that are completely beyond our current experimental capabilities. Which brings us to a pretty profound realization. Computer science has essentially evolved into a meta-science. As AI and information processing pervade every other discipline out there, computer scientists are increasingly building the very systems that do the object-level science for other fields. They're creating systems that observe, experiment, theorize, and test data for physics, biology, and medicine. The boundary between the enterprise of science as a whole and artificial intelligence is becoming beautifully fuzzy. So, is computer science a science? Absolutely, no question. It relies on the rigorous scientific method, it models reality, and it has completely revolutionized theoretical, experimental, and simulated discovery. But it leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought. As we continue to map the fundamental limits of computation, figuring out exactly what a machine can and cannot solve, are we ultimately discovering the limits of human reasoning itself? It is a thrilling frontier, and one that proves computer science isn't just about tools. It's about understanding the very fabric of knowledge and information in our universe. Thanks for exploring this source material with me in today's Explainer. I really hope it sparked your curiosity to learn even more.